On January 16, 2004, a 911 call came in from Hopewell Township, New Jersey. A car had been found in a creek. The engine was still running. Steam rose from the crumpled metal as it sat half-submerged in the freezing water. Inside, slumped over the steering wheel, was 34-year-old Michelle Nice, motionless. It looked like a tragic accident. A woman driving too fast on icy roads, losing control, careening down an embankment into Jacobs Creek. These things happen during New Jersey winters. Black ice, poor visibility. One moment of distraction and a life ends. But Detective Sarah Martinez from the Mercer County Prosecutor's Office wasn't convinced. Something about the scene felt wrong from the moment she arrived. She walked the perimeter of the crash site, her boots crunching in the fresh snow, her breath forming ghostly clouds in the bitter air. Then she saw them. Footprints in the snow. Men's boots. Size 12. Leading away from the passenger side of the vehicle, not the driver's side. Walking deliberately up the embankment, away from the car, disappearing into the darkness. If Michelle had been alone in the car when it crashed, whose footprints were these? To understand how Michelle ended up in that creek, you have to go back 15 years to 1989. That's when Dr. Jonathan Nice, a research scientist in North Carolina, placed a classified ad connecting American men with women from the Philippines. Jonathan was 39, socially awkward, and already divorced once. So he did what many lonely American men did in the late 1980s. He looked overseas for a bride. Michelle Rivera was barely 20 when she started exchanging letters with Jonathan from her home in Orion, Bataan, Philippines, where poverty was a fact of life. The American man writing to her promised everything: education, wealth, opportunity. In 1990, Jonathan traveled to the Philippines and married Michelle. She was 21, he was 40. Michelle was barely an adult when she left everything she knew to move halfway around the world with a man she'd only known through letters and one brief visit. The fairy tale seemed real at first. Jonathan founded Epigenesis Pharmaceuticals that attracted tens of millions in investment. He was developing a revolutionary asthma drug. They built a massive 21-room mansion in Hopewell Township, New Jersey. Michelle gave birth to 3 children, Alex, Trevor, and Samantha. Her father would visit from the Philippines, sometimes for months. On the surface, everything looked perfect. The American dream had come true, but perfection has a way of cracking. By 2002, the cracks in Jonathan's empire had become chasms. His miracle asthma drug never made it to market. Epigenesis Pharmaceuticals collapsed. The millions in investor money evaporated. Suddenly, the mansion, the luxury cars, the lifestyle, all of it was revealed to be built on borrowed time and vanishing money. Michelle, who had spent years as a wealthy man's wife, took a job at the Macy's cosmetics counter at Quaker Bridge Mall. Her manicured hands that once held crystal champagne glasses now applied foundation and lipstick to customers' faces. The humiliation must have been crushing, but there was something else eating away at their marriage. Friends later revealed that Michelle had discovered Jonathan had lied to her from the very beginning. He'd shaved 10 years off his real age when they first met. She thought she was marrying a man in his 30s. In reality, he was pushing 50. The deception had lasted over a decade. Jonathan, for his part, was consumed by something darker. In his office, investigators would later find poetry he'd written on company letterhead. Tormented words about his soul dying, about betrayal, about rage that burned like acid in his chest. Because by 2002, Michelle had found comfort in someone else's arms. Miguel de Jesus was 32 and worked for a landscaping company the Nices used. Different sources tell different stories about how Michelle and Miguel first met. Some say he came to the house about a bill. Others claim they met at a plant nursery. Either way, they exchanged phone numbers. An innocent conversation turned into something more. Miguel, who also went by Alexander Castaneda with multiple social security numbers, was not a good person. He had a common-law wife. He had a pregnant girlfriend he refused to support. He was a documented deadbeat dad and serial cheater. But Michelle was lonely. Her marriage was crumbling. Her wealthy husband had turned out to be a liar, losing everything. So she started an affair with the landscaper who worked on their property. Jonathan found out through an anonymous phone call that must have destroyed him. The voice claimed to be having an affair with Michelle and offered proof for $500,000. Jonathan heard a recording of Michelle's distinctive Filipino accent mingling with another man's voice in intimate conversation. No room for doubt. His wife was cheating on him. When Jonathan confronted Michelle about the affair, she didn't deny it. She didn't cry or beg for forgiveness. According to later testimony, she just looked at him with eyes that held no apology. Their marriage was over, and they both knew it. Jonathan filed extortion charges and obtained a restraining order. During the court hearing, when the judge asked how far Miguel must stay from the property, Jonathan's voice turned cold. "I don't want him anywhere near my wife." Complete separation. That's what he wanted. Not to protect Michelle, but to control her, to punish her for the betrayal. But restraining orders are just pieces of paper, and paper doesn't stop affairs. January 16, 2004, started like any other day. Michelle worked her shift at the Macy's cosmetics counter. Around closing time, she called Jonathan with practiced casualness. She told him she was going out for drinks with some girlfriends from work. Just a normal girls' night out. She was lying. Instead of meeting friends at a bar, Michelle drove to a cheap motel. Miguel de Jesus was waiting for her there. The restraining order that was supposed to keep them apart? Meaningless. They spent hours together at that motel, violating the court order, continuing their affair despite everything that had happened. Jonathan called Michelle's cell phone that night. She didn't answer. He called again. Silence again and again, each unanswered ring confirming what he already knew. She was with Miguel. Each ignored call was like a slap across his face. Around midnight, Michelle's car pulled into their garage. Jonathan was waiting. He'd been waiting in the dark, probably for hours, his rage building with each passing minute, with each unanswered call. He watched his wife get out of her car. She was gathering her belongings. There was a suitcase, packed, ready to go. She was leaving him. After everything he'd given her, after bringing her to America, after building a life together, after giving her 3 children, she was walking out. The argument that followed incinerated 15 years of marriage in minutes. Accusations flew like shattered glass. Michelle moved toward the door, declaring she couldn't stay in their home any longer. And something inside Jonathan snapped. In that garage, rage consumed whatever humanity Jonathan Nice had left. There was a baseball bat nearby, probably one of the kids' sports equipment. In his hands, it transformed from a toy into a weapon. He struck Michelle 4 times, 4 separate blows to her skull. She tried to defend herself. Defensive wounds would later be found slashed across her hands where she'd raised them to protect her head. But she was small, barely over 5 feet tall. He was 6 feet, much stronger. Blood spattered across the garage walls in abstract patterns. The medical examiner would later determine that the blows had caused 4 separate lacerations to her skull. Any one of them could have been fatal. Michelle collapsed in the garage. Blood pooled beneath her head. and Jonathan stood there, looking at what he'd done, holding a baseball bat covered in his wife's blood. Now you'd think a normal person in this situation would call 911, would claim self-defense or an accident, would try to save their spouse's life, or at least accept the consequences of their actions. But Jonathan Nice wasn't a normal person. He was a scientist with a PhD in molecular biology. His brain didn't move toward panic or remorse. It moved toward calculation, toward problem solving. How do I make this look like an accident? What Jonathan did next shows just how cold and methodical he could be. This wasn't a crime of passion anymore. This was premeditation after the fact. First, he adjusted Michelle's car seat. Michelle was short, barely 5'2". She would have had the seat pulled far forward to reach the pedals. Jonathan pushed the seat all the way back. Why? Because he needed room to put her body in the driver's seat, and he was much taller than her. Then he dressed her. Michelle had been wearing specific shoes when she left the house. Jonathan changed them. He put brown shoes on her feet, shoes that didn't match her dark blue outfit at all. Why would someone wear brown shoes with a navy blue outfit? They wouldn't. But Jonathan was in a hurry, and apparently fashion coordination wasn't his strong suit even when staging a scene. He grabbed the suitcase she'd packed, evidence that she was planning to leave him. He put it in the car. Then he loaded Michelle's body into the driver's seat, positioning her behind the wheel. The drive to Jacobs Creek measured exactly 1 mile from their house. Jonathan drove Michelle's car with her body in it, looking for the perfect spot. He found an embankment, steep enough that a car going over it would look like an accident. He maneuvered the car down the slope with surgical precision, staging the crash scene. The car came to rest in the creek, engine still running, everything positioned to look like Michelle had lost control on icy roads and crashed. Then Jonathan walked away, up the embankment, through the snow, back toward his house a mile away. But brilliance sometimes overlooks obvious details, like the fact that it was snowing that night, and snow preserves footprints beautifully. His size 12 boots left a trail of evidence with every step. When Detective Martinez found those footprints, she knew immediately this wasn't an accident. Someone had walked away from that car. Someone had left Michelle Nice to be found in that creek. Martinez and her team began reconstructing what had happened. They searched the Nice mansion, and what they found was damning. In the garage, blood spatter on the walls. Jonathan had tried to scrub it clean, but you can't really remove blood completely. Luminol would later reveal patterns that told the story of violence, cast-off spatter from a baseball bat being swung repeatedly. In the laundry room, clothes soaking in pink water. Pink because they were stained with blood and Jonathan had tried to wash it out. The washing machine was still running when investigators arrived, still trying to destroy evidence. The baseball bat tested positive for Michelle's blood. But the most bizarre discovery was what forensic scientist Ed Gainsbourg found scattered throughout the house. Plastic fragments, pieces of what appeared to be boot soles, hidden in toy boxes, tucked into Christmas decorations, concealed in impossible places throughout the mansion. What were these fragments, and why were they hidden all over the house? Gainsbourg started collecting every piece he could find. It was like a twisted scavenger hunt. Piece by piece, he began assembling them like a puzzle, the shoes that told the truth. Ed Gainsbourg laid out all the plastic fragments he'd collected on a lab table. Then he started the painstaking work of reassembly. It took hours, but slowly, the pieces came together. They were boot soles, work boot soles, size 12. Someone had sawed them off the boots and glued them to something else. But glued them to what? Investigators found a pair of Jonathan's comfortable loafers in his closet, size 12. Gainsbourg examined them closely under magnification and found traces of the same adhesive. The break patterns matched perfectly. The dimensions were identical. Think about what this means for a second. Jonathan Nice had sawed the soles off work boots, glued them to the bottoms of his comfortable moccasins, worn them to stage the crash scene so it would look like someone wearing work boots had been there, then removed the soles and hidden the pieces throughout his house. Why would anyone do this? Jonathan later claimed it was for comfort, that the boot soles made his loafers more cushioned. But who glues boot soles to the bottom of house slippers? And who then cuts them off and hides the pieces in their kids' toy boxes? The answer was obvious. Someone staging a crime scene who wanted to leave false footprints. Someone trying to make it look like a different person, maybe a construction worker or landscaper in work boots, had been at the crash site instead of a wealthy scientist in comfortable loafers. The plan might have worked too if Gainsbourg hadn't been so thorough in his search. Those fragments were hidden in the most unlikely places. But once they were found and reassembled, they told an undeniable story. Investigators also found bloody towels hidden in the chimney. DNA testing confirmed it was Michelle's blood. They found microscopic blood spatter on the garage walls that had survived Jonathan's frantic cleaning efforts. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Jonathan Nice had ended his wife's life in their garage, then methodically staged a car accident to cover it up. When detectives came to arrest Jonathan, his composure, the same ice-cold calculation that had let him stage such an elaborate cover-up, completely shattered. He sobbed uncontrollably, his body shaking with the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and primal. But even through the tears, his scientist's brain was still working, still trying to construct a narrative that might save him. He admitted causing Michelle's injuries. But it was an accident, he claimed. She'd attacked him in the garage with a stiletto knife. They'd struggled in the darkness. She'd fallen, hit her head. It was all a tragic accident. Detective Martinez listened to his story, then asked the obvious question. If it was an accident, why did you go to such elaborate lengths to cover it up? Why stage a car crash? Why hide boot sole fragments throughout your house? Why wash bloody clothes and hide towels in the chimney? Jonathan had no answer, because there was no good answer. The cover-up betrayed the crime. Innocent people don't stage elaborate accident scenes. Guilty people do. Jonathan Nice's trial began in 2005 and immediately attracted national media attention. A wealthy pharmaceutical executive, a mail-order bride, a sordid affair with the landscaper. It had all the elements of a tabloid sensation. The prosecution laid out a case of premeditated ending. They showed the jury the forensic evidence, the boot soles, the blood spatter, the baseball bat, the bloody towels hidden in the chimney. They explained how Jonathan had methodically staged the crash scene, how he'd changed Michelle's shoes, how he'd adjusted the car seat to fit her body. This wasn't passion, they argued. This was calculation, cold-blooded planning. A man who could saw boot soles and glue them to loafers, stage a crash scene and hide evidence throughout his mansion, wasn't acting in a moment of uncontrolled rage. He was executing a plan. But the defense had a powerful card to play: the affair. They painted Michelle as the unfaithful wife who had destroyed their marriage. They brought Miguel de Jesus to the stand, who admitted to the affair. They revealed intimate details, including testimony that Michelle and Miguel had unprotected relations. Some jurors visibly recoiled with disgust when they heard these details. You could see it on their faces, moral judgment creeping in, sympathy for Jonathan building. The defense argued passion provocation manslaughter. Yes, Jonathan had ended Michelle's life, but he'd been driven to it by her betrayal. She'd been with Miguel that very night, violating a court order, continuing her affair. She'd come home with a packed suitcase, ready to abandon him and their children. Any man would have snapped under those circumstances, they suggested. It was a calculated legal strategy, and it worked. After days of deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty of passion provocation manslaughter, not premeditated ending, not even second degree, a lesser charge that carried a much lighter sentence. The judge sentenced Jonathan Nice to 8 years in prison. The courtroom erupted. Michelle's sister stood, pointing with trembling fingers. 8 years? That's all my sister's life is worth? Prosecutors slammed files shut, faces etched with frustration. They'd presented overwhelming evidence of premeditation. The boot soles alone proved methodical planning. But the jury chose to see passion where calculation lived. Michelle's family wept openly. 8 years for ending a woman's life. Jonathan slumped forward, shoulders shaking. His 3 children sat in the gallery, struggling to understand how their father transformed from protector to ending. The jury foreman later explained they saw a man genuinely provoked, not a calculating ending. But the truth was clear. Jonathan had lived with knowledge of the affair for over a year, writing tortured poetry, filing legal papers, watching his marriage crumble piece by piece. The elaborate cover-up, sawed boot soles, staged accident, systematic evidence destruction, spoke to premeditation masquerading as passion. Here's where the story gets even more disturbing. Jonathan Nice served his 8-year sentence at Southwood State Prison in Bridgeton, New Jersey. But with credit for good behavior and time served before sentencing, he was released on December 5, 2010, after serving only 5 years. 5 years for ending his wife's life. He returned to his parents' home in Collegeville, Pennsylvania, and reunited with his 3 children. He told reporters it was a tearful reunion and that they couldn't get enough of each other. In 2012, Jonathan published a book titled Under Color of Law: The Deliberate Conviction of an Innocent Man and the Destruction of a Family. In it, he changed his story completely. Now he claimed Miguel de Jesus had drugged Michelle to initially get her into bed, then stalked her. He alleged Michelle only went to the motel that final night because she'd been tricked into thinking there was a baby shower there. Amazon reviewers gave his book 1.5 stars out of 5. It's no longer available for sale. But Jonathan wasn't done committing crimes, not by a long shot. After his release, he became editor-in-chief of an online academic journal called the Journal of Cancer Science and Cell Biology. He told people he was going back to his roots in cancer research. He claimed he wanted to dedicate his life to curing cancer. It was all a lie. Starting in 2012, the same year he published his book proclaiming innocence, Jonathan began a new scheme. He created several companies with names like Canine Care, ACGT, and CAGT. Through these companies, he claimed to sell drugs that could cure cancer in dogs. The drugs were called Tumexol and Natrason. Jonathan's websites made bold claims. Tumexol is effective against a wide variety of cancers, and Tumexol will almost always restore a cancer-stricken dog's appetite, spirit, and energy. He even falsely claimed his research was funded in part by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. None of it was true. The drugs were nothing more than a cocktail of over-the-counter pet medications that Jonathan and his son mixed together at a facility in Collegeville. They had no therapeutic value. They certainly didn't cure cancer. But Jonathan charged hundreds or even thousands of dollars per treatment. He targeted the most vulnerable people imaginable, pet owners with terminally ill dogs who were desperate for anything that might save their beloved animals. He told them their pets could be part of clinical trials, but they had to pay him large sums of money to secure a spot. Think about how cruel that is. These people were watching their dogs suffer and going away. They would have paid anything for hope. And Jonathan Nice exploited that desperation for profit. Between 2012 and 2020, Jonathan sold nearly $1 million worth of fake cancer drugs to approximately 900 victims. In February 2020, federal authorities finally caught up with him. He was charged with wire fraud and interstate shipment of misbranded animal drugs. In December 2022, a federal jury convicted him on all charges. On February 16, 2024, exactly 20 years after he ended Michelle's life, Jonathan Nice stood before a federal judge for sentencing. Federal prosecutors called him a prolific con man and an unrepentant scoundrel. Assistant U.S. Attorney Christopher Parisi told the judge, his dedication was not to research and science. It was to making a quick buck. He is a snake oil salesman. He is a con man. Jonathan's daughter Samantha, who was only 6 years old and sleeping upstairs the night her father ended her mother's life, pleaded with the judge to show mercy. She was now in her 20s, and she begged for probation instead of prison time. The judge sentenced Jonathan Nice to 97 months in federal prison. Just over 8 years. Almost the exact same sentence he'd received for ending Michelle. As of 2025, Jonathan Nice, now 74 years old, sits in federal prison. He won't be eligible for release until he's well into his 80s. After serving his sentence, he'll face 3 years of supervised release. Miguel de Jesus continues his life, forever marked as the catalyst whose affair led to a woman's ending. Though he never raised a hand in violence, Michelle's 3 children lost their mother to violence and their father to prison. Twice. They grew up without either parent, raised by relatives who struggled to explain how their father transformed from protector to convicted, ending to con artist. Michelle's family never got real justice. 8 years for her life, 5 years actually served. Then freedom to commit more crimes, to hurt more people, to prove that he'd learned nothing from his time in prison. The Jonathan Nice case is infuriating on multiple levels. The most obvious is the lenient sentence he received for ending his wife's life. 8 years, reduced to 5 with good behavior, for beating a woman to the end with a baseball bat and staging an elaborate cover-up. The jury's willingness to see passion in such methodical planning shows how the victim's behavior, specifically her affair, influenced their perception of the crime. Michelle was far from perfect. She cheated on her husband. She violated a restraining order. She packed a suitcase to leave. But none of those actions justify being beaten to the end. None of them make her ending an understandable crime of passion. The boot soles tell the real story. Think about the mindset required to saw soles off work boots, glue them to comfortable loafers, wear them to stage a crime scene, then cut them off and hide the pieces throughout your house. That's not passion. That's calculation. That's a mind working through a problem step by step. The fact that Jonathan went on to commit more crimes after his release proves he never accepted responsibility for what he did. His book claiming innocence, his scheme selling fake cancer drugs to desperate pet owners, it all shows a pattern. Jonathan Nice believes he's smarter than everyone else. He believes he can manipulate systems, exploit people's desperation, and get away with it. And for a long time, he did get away with it. 5 years in prison for ending someone. Then 8 more years of freedom to scam nearly 1,000 people out of their money while their dogs were passing away. The forensic evidence that convicted him was brilliant work. Ed Gainsbourg's patient reconstruction of those boot sole fragments, the blood spatter analysis, the DNA evidence, all of it came together to prove what happened in that garage. Without that evidence, Jonathan might have convinced everyone Michelle's ending was an accident. But even with overwhelming proof of premeditation, the jury still gave him the lightest possible sentence because they sympathized with a man whose wife had cheated on him. Michelle Rivera Nice was 34 years old when she went away in that garage. She'd come to America as a 20-year-old bride looking for a better life. She'd given birth to 3 children. She'd worked at a cosmetics counter after her husband's company collapsed. And when she finally decided to leave her failing marriage, her husband ended her life rather than let her go. Her American dream ended in blood and snow beside a frozen creek. Her 3 children grew up without a mother. And her ending served 5 years before walking free to scam hundreds more victims. Jonathan Nice sits in federal prison today, still maintaining his innocence in Michelle's passing, still believing he's the smartest person in the room. But the forensic evidence doesn't lie. The boot soles don't lie. The blood spatter doesn't lie. A brilliant scientist was undone by his own meticulous nature. The same calculating mind that let him stage an elaborate accident scene also made him too clever for his own good. Those boot soles were his downfall. Without them, he might have convinced everyone his wife's ending was an accident. Justice came too late and too light for Michelle Nice. But at least it came. And now, finally, Jonathan Nice is exactly where he belongs, behind bars, facing the consequences of decades of manipulation, lies, and crime. The perfect husband turned out to be perfectly guilty of ending, of fraud, of exploiting desperate people for profit. And this time, he'll stay in prison until he's too old to hurt anyone else.